Microfocus, creators of visual programming tools for software development, is pleased to provide major funding for the Computer Chronicles, the story of this continuing evolution.
Welcome to the Computer Chronicles. I'm Stuart Chaffee, and this is Gary Kildall, and piled up in front of us is just a small example of the word processing programs which are available. Gary, I'm told that today there are about 150 different word processing programs you can buy, and some word processors, in fact, word processors like the little one I was using here, doesn't come on a disk at all. It comes built into RAM, inside the hardware here. Now, in this particular Radio Shack 100, it has what it calls a text editor. But I'm not sure, how does that differ from a word processor?
Okay. Stuart, a text editor is really a program that's used to prepare programs. When you write a program the very first time, and obviously most cases is not correct, and you have to go back and make changes to those programs. And to do that in an interactive way, you use a text editor. But a text editor is really not very good for working with documents, paragraphs, cut and paste operations, things that you normally do to prepare a document. So that's what a word processor is for. And word processors, as you mentioned, come in a variety of sizes and styles, and it's tough to make a choice sometimes. We'll be able to talk about some of those things today.
Okay, we're going to be looking at more than just traditional word processing. We'll also be looking at writing processors or writer's aids, software which not only helps you type better, but hopefully helps you write better. But even traditional word processing has changed much of business writing, and one good example is the way word processors are used in the newspaper business. The modern newspaper office has become a cooperative venture between the printed word and its electronic counterpart. Word processors have eliminated many of the intermediate steps between a writer's notepad and the camera-ready copy. In many instances, a story never sees a page of paper until the final stages of printing. Instead, a column can be electronically transferred from the writer's word processor over phone lines to a terminal in the editorial department. Like a remote cottage industry, the columnist, living 30 miles away from his workplace, types and makes corrections on his own terminal, picks up his telephone, and sends his story through to the city desk. Recently, entire books have been written this way, stored on disks until the final draft, and shipped via modem to the publisher. Word processing means more than just electronic transmission. It also offers different degrees of interaction with the creative process, from correcting spelling errors to stylistic advice. Writers disagree on what effect word processing will have on the quality of our written language. Some writers are concerned that computer assistants may promote dry, bland writing by diluting an individual's style. But others claim that they improve writing ability because they operate at the writer's discretion, providing as much or as little editorial assistance as the user chooses. To what degree these language manipulators will change how we write, as well as where we write, remains to be seen. With us now is Jim Edlin of Bruce & James Program Publishing, and Jim is the designer of WordVision, one of the newest word processors on the market. And with us also is Paul Schindler, West Coast editor of Information Systems News and a reviewer of software. Gary?
Well, I think I'll just start this off and talk a little bit about the definitions that we're working with, just to get everybody sort of on the same basis. Word processors are said to be the most popular applications for small computers, and also they're one of the very first applications. What sort of things do you look for as the standard features in a word processor, and what kind of desirable options would you look for?
Well, it's interesting to think about a word processor just in the terms of the name. It's a computer program that allows you to process words, just like older computers were primarily oriented towards processing data. The most important thing is it should be easy to learn and easy to use. I know those are popular buzzwords, but it should allow you to sit down with a blank screen and with a minimum of fuss and muss create a document. And since most of us are not perfect, it should allow you to correct errors easily, to move portions of the document around, and then in a function which is separated in some packages and integrated in others, you should be able to take the words which you've just written casually on the screen and format them in a precise and pleasing way. The number of lines per page, headlines on the page, footnotes, superscripts and subscripts if you're writing a scientific paper. Those are the major features. As with any software program, I'm personally convinced that it's like an automobile. You should never buy it unless you've taken it for a test run. It should be something that you're that familiar with at least.
Mm-hmm. So go to the dealer and try it out and see what's...
Try it out. Try several.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, there's a tremendous price range in word processing programs. You've got, say, Jim's WordVision, $50 to $70 range. You've got WordStar, maybe up to $500. How different can word processors be to cover that tremendous price range?
They tend to differ in function, and one of the things I've learned after 5 years of writing in the computer press is that you can't just deal with price or just deal with performance. I think the most fundamentally important concept I've learned in writing about all of these products, hardware and software, is that you have to think in terms of price performance, and typically the price reflects the performance. With all due respect to WordVision, which is a nifty software package, there are things that WordStar can do that WordVision can't. I'm also told, however, there are things that WordVision can do that WordStar can't. And it's a matter of deciding what you personally need. I'm a reporter. I need to be able to slap words on the screen. In fact, I own a word processor. It's an unusual one written by a friend of mine that has no page formatting back end. I don't print my stories out on paper. I send them to a computer in New York, so I don't care. But if someone cares, they'd better find a package with sophistication in that area. So the price tends to reflect, as a rule, the level of sophistication of the program.
I think that's changing to some extent now. The price is a very difficult thing to work with right now, because a lot of companies are really trying to do mass marketing of software, and so the price may be much less because the market is much larger.
On that one, because it's true what you say about price performance, but on the other hand, there's also a time factor in that. The $5 calculator you can buy in the Safeway today will do more than the $500 calculator you could buy 10 years ago. So really you have to consider price levels as they change over time and as they change over the market. Because when a company like IBM puts out 600,000 computers in a single year, and as those numbers keep growing, the numbers which a company like ours can amortize its development and other costs over are growing so substantially that it's possible to offer more and still charge less.
So it's really important to look at the functionality that's provided in the software package as well as the price, for sure.
One of the things, I was at a recent writer's seminar on not being afraid of the computer, and one of the things that someone suggested in terms of hardware, and I think it's equally applicable to software, is don't buy more than you need. You don't need some gigantic 32-bit super microcomputer if all you want to do is simple word processing. If you're never going to do a spreadsheet and you don't need a database, buy a small machine and a simple package. And I think it's exactly the same in software. You can, there are articles appearing constantly which compare all the word processors along an axis of 42 features. Well, if you only need 6 of those, then buy the least expensive package that has the 6 features you need.
Jim, you've got WordVision tantalizingly sitting on our IBM PC here, and maybe you could tell us a bit about WordVision and how it differs from the word processors which have preceded it.
I would. Before actually twiddling with the keys, I guess I could say a couple of things conceptually about it. One of which is we call it a writing tool rather than a word processor. And our theory there is that this is a tool meant for a person who is working with his or her own words rather than somebody working in a secretarial context with someone else's words. And the premise we've started from is that you have to look and see, are those needs different? And we think they are. And then to respond to those different needs rather than emulate what's been working in every office for 5 or 10 years. The second thing, we come from a perspective of what we would call people literacy. We have heard the various people crying, the world needs more computer literate people, and we've said no. What the world really needs and what we now can have is people literate computers, computers that understand what people do. So you can see, for example, one of the things we've resorted to is familiar symbols and sequences, red, yellow, and green like on a traffic light, which most of the people who will use such a machine instinctively understand in a part of their brain where they don't have to think through things. They understand red and green. So we've used it on the screen, and indeed, although we make it possible for people not to have to do this if they would object to it, we also use it on the keyboard. We have taken IBM being the first machine we've addressed, Both, I guess. We've taken their keyboard and said, yes, it's very fine clay, but it could stand a little modeling. And so I've applied some of the labels that we supply, and actually in more recent versions now, we supply slip-over key tops instead of these labels that help people find their way around this keyboard.
Okay, Jim, we have very little time, so maybe you could get to a quick demonstration of WordVision itself.
Sure. From this traffic light screen, if you wanted, say, to work with a file on a disk, first you'd press the green key to get your blank sheet of paper, and then a key that says Files to begin working with files of writing that you may have stored on disk. You get pictures of file folders. You would never have to type in, as say in earlier programs, the name of the file you want. You simply point to it and you press a key that's indicated right on the screen. The folder pops up, and in a moment you'll see the text that was stored in that file appear on the screen. Now if you wanted to rearrange that, say, have it look different on paper, and that's one of the two things that a tool like this helps you do, you'd press a key that says Format, and then the yellow one for page appearance. You would get on the screen an image of the page that you're working with and a list alongside of the various things about it that you can change. For example, making the text width smaller, or moving it around so that the margins are different to adjust it on the page. Very quickly when you're through, as it tells you right on the screen, you press the key with the familiar stop sign. It spends a moment doing its business, and it all comes back, rearranged just the way you said.
Okay, thank you, Jim. We're going to be back in just a moment and take a look at not only a writer's tool, but what are sometimes called writer's aids, not only software that can help you type better, that actually will help you write better. And that'll be coming up next. Okay, joining us now is Warren Kuhl of AT&T Western Electric, the developers of the Writer's Workbench, which we're going to see in just a moment, and Wayne Holder of Oasis, and I believe, Wayne, you have Word Plus and something called Punctuation and Style. Gary, you want to start?
I guess the software we've seen so far really makes your personal computer into sort of a fancy typewriter, but I understand that the way that you're working with software that really goes beyond that is sort of the next stage of analyzing the words and paragraphs that you've composed. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's correct. Our software is designed to take over where the writing process leaves off. Writing is inherently a creative process that you don't want to interrupt with concerns such as finding spelling errors and looking for redundant phrasing and so forth. So our software takes the files that you've created and runs through a series of punctuation, spelling, and stylistic checks and gives you recommendations where those problems can be fixed.
Could you run a demo for us of
Certainly.
Word Plus?
I have a simple file in here. What I'll do right now is to just have the spelling checker take over and run against the file. As it operates, it's going to scan the text and then bring up any spelling problems that it finds, which should take it about 15 seconds. Then it will allow me to interactively look at the spelling errors that I have and to summon up suggestions from the built-in dictionary for what the correct spelling should be. Then it will make those corrections automatically in the text. At this point, it's finished checking the file. I now have my first misspelled word there, which is although. If I ask the computer for assistance, or the program for assistance, it will bring up the correct spelling in the upper left. I can hit the correction key, bring the spelling down, and then proceed on to the document in that way. The idea is that you get simultaneous aid and correction, so that it takes the tedium out of doing the spelling checking process.
How about punctuation and style? What does that do?
Well, the second step really would be doing writing style analysis, which I'll bring up next. That is, if you were to look at writing style books, you'd have a collection of problems that people typically fall into traps in phrasing. This program is designed to quickly scan the text for those problems. When it finds a problem in the text, it will bring it up and show it to me on the screen. I can then have the choice to mark the problem in the file so I can later go back and edit it. Here it's found utilization, which is sort of a fancy way of saying use. The program is recommending that you scale that down. If I continue on through, it'll find small in size, which is a redundant way of just simply saying small, and so forth. in that fashion, the program would proceed through the text and make different recommendations.
Wayne, do you enumerate all the possibilities that the program actually checks for? In other words, when you're doing a spelling check, do you have a dictionary of words, or are you actually looking for letter combinations that are unlikely? Or in a case like this,
in the spelling checking, we're using an actual dictionary that it compares against. In the phrase checking, we have a list of phrases that we've compiled from different phrase books and other sources that will, in fact, a large part of the work is based upon some of the original work that was done at AT&T for the Writer's Workbench. And for the punctuation checking, we have simply constructed a program that tries to reflect all the nuances of punctuation.
Wayne, is these programs available to run on a floppy, on a micro?
That's the idea. Ours are designed to be practical packages that a person can buy now and use on most of the available word processors and microcomputers that they can buy.
Okay, Wayne, you mentioned this is somewhat derivative of Writer's Workbench, and Warren, that's your area at AT&T. Maybe if you guys could help move the K-Pro out of the way, and we could then get to Warren's demonstration of Writer's Workbench. And I understand, Warren, you're really tied in here to a computer over in Hayward somewhere.
Yes, we are.
And show us what Writer's Workbench does.
Okay, I think it's significant to mention, first of all, the Writer's Workbench is a feature package running on Unix System 5. And at that, we point out here that it's a relatively powerful set of tools that aid a writer in structuring and sharpening their writing talents. And I like to always point out that that's important to the reader also, because I do a lot more reading than writing on my job, and I think that's a good thing to point out. One of the things that we do here, we do many of the things that we just saw Wayne demonstrate. We have the proofreading side, and we have a prose which is going to do a stylistic analysis of the text that we have out here. I'll be very brief here. It goes over spelling, it goes over punctuation, double words, diction, many of the things you just saw, but it also looks for split infinitives, and that's one of the powerful parts of it. And we'll take a look at that. Let's just briefly jump down into the area that Wayne just left. There are 4 areas that actually do or allow the user to structure or tailor their own environment. The spelling area, there's the word choice, which is very similar to the stylistic points that he just made. And there's a sexist phrase dictionary out there that can be styled locally also. And in fact, here's a case where our text had some sexist phrase in there, manpower, and it itemized that. And then it'll go a little bit further in the next screen and actually make a recommendation that says substitute the words personnel, staff, or workers instead of manpower. Okay? And it goes on to many of the other types of words that Wayne was talking about, for example, which and that, something that we commonly misuse. I know I do a lot. And it'll make recommendations in that area. Now, the more powerful parts of Writer's Workbench software becomes a derivative of the fact that you can go out and assign a part of speech to every word in the text. And by doing that, you can actually find split infinitives. Here it found an adverb splitting the form of the verb to find, to hopefully find. And the way it does that is it goes out, as I said, and here you have an actual text that we were running on this demo. And you can see where these parts of speech have been assigned here. There's the verb, the adverb, and the verb. Gives it a lot of powerful things that it can do. Now, in addition to what you see there, that aids in the stylistic analysis portion of this. Let's talk just briefly here. We use a couple different sets of comparative samples, and in here we're using instructional samples. You can put it documentation. Lawyers may put legal type documents out. You can go down to your boss's level, as a matter of fact, and let it go out and compare. Once it's done that, it comes back and makes an evaluation based on the comparison that it just did. For example, here it said that this text, in accordance with a Kincaid readability, was written for 13th grade education level for comprehension. And if you go a little bit further down here, it says for instructional text, it should be written at a 10th grade level so that it's better understood. They go on to then make many recommendations, and I do have, just to show you, there's a fair amount of text that comes back to the writer to enable them to go through and determine how to structure that according to that scale. The important thing to say is that it does this based on the mix of simple to compound complex sentences. And here you can see it said 71% of the sentences were complex, 14% were simple. The difference here is 57 and should have been closer to 28 or less than 28. So it goes into a lot of this type of analyzations.
Warren, where is something like this being used right now?
Primarily in the Bell Labs and the AT&T Western Electric locations. It's also been used in the Colorado State University. 2,500 students have gone through that, where they've overwhelmingly reported good results, and now it's being run as part of their composition courses.
It seems like it'd be a tremendous teaching tool just to get some feedback on your writing.
Definitely.
Do you think that that people will become a little more dependent upon this and expect it to be very reliable and sort of say, well, since it passed the writer's workbench, I guess it must be be good material.
I sure do. On top of that, I think it's important to point out that it's important in the other areas of business and professionals where you're going after a style like in journalists, where you want something to come back. You can actually go out here and do things in a passive sense. In other words, in creative writing, that's a little bit different than in the technical type writing. You might want to look for all the passive and the to-be forms of the verb. You can do that. And when you do something of that nature, you can go back and flavor it. For example, instead of saying, it was thundering, you can say the thunder or lightning. The lightning flashed across the sky. Something along those lines. And you can get very, very thought-provoking words. And I might point out that...
It'll have to be brief.
Okay. The real important part of the writer's workbench is there are 27 different functions that can be run. You've only seen a very few of them here from the standpoint of the stylistic analyzation. The types of things that go out and look for abstract words, things that look for topics. There are very, very powerful things in terms of reporting in this area.
Warren, Wayne, thank you very much. They're fascinating, fascinating applications. And thank you for joining us. Hope we'll see you again next week on the Computer Chronicles.
Microfocus, creators of visual programming tools for software development, is pleased to provide major funding for the Computer Chronicles, the story of this continuing evolution.